For a moment, imagine standing on a harsh northern coastline where the wind never really stops, where every breath feels like it cuts straight through your clothes, and where winter dominates most of the year. Now imagine living there, raising a family, storing food, maintaining a warm home without electricity, without modern insulation, and without the luxury of advanced tools. Yet somehow, for centuries, Arctic families and Viking settlers did exactly that. They created homes that stayed warm, dry, and surprisingly silent, even as storms screamed across the landscape. Their secret wasn't just their craftsmanship or their stubborn resilience, it was their roof-a-clever, layered living structure that worked as an early form of biological engineering. This ancient roof wasn't simply a covering to keep the rain out. It was a systematic, interconnected assembly of natural materials that each played a role in protecting the home beneath. These roofs harnessed wood for strength, bark for waterproofing, moss for insulation, and sod for stability and silence. Long before modern building science existed, these communities understood something deep about the environment. The best protection often comes from working with nature, not against it. At the base of this roof sat a rigid wooden deck constructed from thick planks laid across sturdy beams. This foundation wasn't decorative, it carried enormous weight, because the layers above, once complete, could weigh as much as a small vehicle. But that weight was essential. It compressed everything below it, sealed gaps, and prevented wind from sneaking inside. Even the coldest Arctic gusts, the kind that could rattle a modern cabin, were stopped outright by this structural layer. On top of the wood came one of the most remarkable natural materials ever used in construction: birch bark. Thin, flexible, and astonishingly durable, birch bark functioned almost exactly like a modern waterproof membrane. It resisted rot, shed rain and melting snow, and formed a tight seal even after decades of compression. Builders layered sheet after sheet of bark, overlapping them carefully until they created a continuous, watertight skin. This was the true weather barrier of the roof, the layer that kept moisture from entering and freezing within the structure. But waterproofing alone wasn't enough. The Arctic is not just wet, it's bitterly cold. To keep the warmth inside, early builders added thick mats of moss, straw, or other organic fibers on top of the bark. This layer was the insulation. Moss was the most prized material because it behaved almost like a natural sponge. It absorbed small amounts of moisture gradually, prevented the bark from drying out and cracking, and compressed into a dense mat that trapped warm air. These mats created a soft, thermal cushion that prevented indoor heat from escaping through the roof. And then came the most iconic and powerful part of the system, the sod layer. Thick slabs of turf grass, roots, soil, and all were cut from the earth and placed carefully across the entire roof, often a foot or more deep. This layer gave the roof its signature appearance. But the sod wasn't just for looks. Its weight pushed down on the layers below, pressing them tightly together. The roots intertwined to create a tough, erosion-resistant mat. The soil added thermal mass that slowed down heat loss in winter and kept the interior cooler in summer. And because the sod was alive, it slowly repaired itself over time. Cracks resealed, roots spread, and the roof grew stronger year after year. Inside the home, the result was astonishing. Even when the world outside was buried in snow, the interior remained warm and stable. The combination of mass, insulation, and a living outer layer created a thermal envelope far more effective than most ancient civilizations ever achieved. This roof was, in many ways, an early form of eco-engineering, hundreds of years before the term existed. But warmth wasn't the only challenge these communities faced. Arctic regions are shockingly loud. Windstorms can roar like engines, and loose snow can hammer against wood with a constant, relentless rattle. A simple wooden roof would have turned every storm into a deafening experience. The Viking turf roof, however, acted as a natural sound absorber. The dense soil muted low-frequency rumbling, the vegetation disrupted mid-range vibrations, and the moss layer killed high-frequency whistles. Altogether, they created a quiet interior space even during violent storms. This principal mass plus porous materials equals silences still used in modern soundproofing today. Yet perhaps the most impressive part of this design was its ventilation. Most people hear the word insulation and imagine sealing everything tightly, but ancient builders understood that a sealed roof was dangerous. Warm indoor air rising into a cold roof cavity would condense into water, freeze, melt, and eventually rot the structure. To avoid this, the Vikings built subtle ventilation channels along the ridge or edges of the roof. These openings allowed stale, moist air to escape, while preventing cold outside air from blasting inward. The roof breathed slowly, steadily, and safely. This balance between insulation and ventilation is something many modern DIY builders still struggle with today. The entire roof was also extraordinarily sustainable. Every part of it came from the local environment: wood from forests, bark from trees, moss from riverbanks, and sod from nearby fields. If a section became damaged, repairs were quick and simple. You didn't need nails, shingles, or synthetic materials. You just lifted the sod, replaced the layer beneath, and pressed it back down. Over time, the new turf bonded with the old, restoring the roof naturally. It was a system designed to work with nature's cycles rather than fight them. What makes this truly fascinating is how easily these principles can be adapted for modern use. Anyone building a small cabin, shed, or off-grid shelter in a cold climate can benefit from the same ideas. Begin with a strong, rigid deck to support weight. Add a waterproof barrier to protect against moisture. Layer in breathable organic insulation that traps air without trapping water. Then add mass-weather sod, turf, soil, or even a modern green roof system to stabilize temperature and dampen sound. And finally, incorporate subtle ventilation near the top. This approach creates a roof that stays warm, stays quiet, and lasts far longer than many modern shortcuts. When we look back at these ancient techniques, it becomes clear that the Vikings weren't just warriors or explorers, they were engineers. Their homes survived centuries of brutal weather because they used natural materials intelligently. Understanding how each layer interacted with the environment around it, in an age where modern construction often prioritizes speed over longevity, their methods offer a powerful reminder. Sometimes, the most effective solutions are the ones developed slowly, patiently, and with deep knowledge of the land. So whether you're building a tiny backyard cabin, an off-grid shelter in the mountains, or simply fascinated by historical engineering, the lessons of the silent Viking roof still hold value. This was more than a roofit. It was a masterpiece of low-maintenance design, thermal science, and acoustic engineering, centuries ahead of its time. And the fact that these structures continue to inspire modern builders shows that ancient knowledge remains just as relevant today as ever. If this kind of forgotten building wisdom sparks your curiosity, there's an entire world of ancient engineering waiting to be rediscovered techniques that can still transform the way we build warm and protect our spaces in the modern world.